Right, let us move to the programme motion to be moved formally. Questions as on the order paper as many of the opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no, the ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
National Insurance Contributions, Secondary Class 1 Contributions Bill. Consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now.
No. Before we move to the consideration of the Lord's amendments, I can confirm that Lord's amendments 1 to 20 engage Commons financial privilege. Having careful consideration of Lord's Amendment 20, I am satisfied that it would impose a charge on the public revenue which is not authorised by a money resolution passed by this House on the 3rd of December 2024. In accordance with paragraph 3 of Standing Order number 78, the amendment will therefore be deemed to be disagreed to and is not available for debate. We will begin with Government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendments 1, with which we will consider the other Government motions to disagree with the Lord's Amendments listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to consider the Lord's Amendments to the National Insurance Contributions Secondary Class Contributions Bill. I'd like to start, Mr Speaker, by thanking members of both Houses for their careful scrutiny and consideration of this bill. I'd like to place on record my particular thanks to the Financial Secretary, Lord Livermore, for his invaluable support and for leading the bill so expertly through the other place. Now, during this bill's consideration in the other place, 21 amendments were made, 20 of which we will seek to address here today. But before I address these amendments directly, Mr Speaker, let me remind both Houses of the context for this bill. When we entered government, we inherited a fiscal situation that was completely unsustainable. We have had to take difficult but necessary decisions to repair the public finances and rebuild our public services. The measures in this bill represent some of the toughest decisions that we have had to take as a result. In order to restore fiscal responsibility and get public services back on their feet, we needed to raise revenue, including through the measures that this bill will introduce. And many of the amendments from the other place put at risk the funding that this bill seeks to raise. So let me be clear. To support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises. And it is with that in mind that I will now turn to the first group of amendments. I'll give way.
The Minister giving way. He does talk about one of the mission he's made is talking about growth, which is what the government's raison d'etre is. Last week we found out that the economy actually shrank. Has he done any work to find out how much that point percentage drop has caused in terms of cost to the government? Because that's going to have a huge impact when we're discussing tax implications.
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I've set out to the honourable gentleman in a number of debates in recent weeks, the reason why we as a government had to take difficult but necessary decisions was to restore fiscal responsibility after the completely unsustainable situation that we inherited from the party opposite. And that fiscal responsibility, that economic stability, is essential for greater investment in the economy, which is the bedrock for growth, the growth that we are so determined to pursue. I'll give way.
The Minister for giving way. I wonder if he could outline how many billions the government will spend this year, what percentage 22 billion would be of that, and an additional question, if I can be so greedy, Mr Speaker, is how much the flatlining of the economy has cost the government compared to that 22 billion, because I'll put it to the Minister that the impact of this NIC rise has been much greater than this mythical 22 billion alleged by the government.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm not clear from the honourable gentleman's intervention whether he finally accepts the £22 billion black hole that we inherited when we took government, because I know several of his colleagues have sought to rewrite history, but the facts are there, that we inherited a completely unsustainable fiscal situation with pressures, a £22 billion black hole that we had to take difficult but necessary decisions to remedy. And it's important to do that because without the basic fiscal responsibility that a government should deliver, without that economic stability, the investment, which is the basis for growth, will not happen. I'll give way.
Honourable Minister for giving way. He spoke about facts. Is he aware of the fact that when the Labour Party won the election, the economy was growing? And is he aware of the fact that now the economy is falling?
Mr. Speaker, I am very aware of the fact that we inherited an economy and a fiscal situation in a mess that was completely unsustainable, and that it was our duty as a government to address. No responsible government could have let things carry on as they were. With the fiscal situation in the way it was when we inherited, no responsible government could have let that carry on. And that is why we had to take the action we did. I'm not going to give away. I'm going to make some progress. I've given away several times already. But that is why we had to take those decisions, Mr. Speaker, to put the fiscal responsibility back at the heart of government, to return economic stability to the public finances, and to have that basis for the investment on which we can grow the economy and put more money in people's pockets. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will turn to the first set of Lord's amendments, which I will discuss together, namely 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13, as they relate to the NHS and social care providers. Mr. Speaker, these amendments seek to maintain the employer national insurance contribution rates and thresholds at their current level for NHS commissioned services, including GPs, dentists, social care providers and pharmacists, as well as those providing hospice care. As honourable members in both Houses will know, as a result of the measures in this bill and wider budget measures, the NHS will receive an extra £22.6 billion over 2 years, helping to deliver an extra 40,000 elective appointments every week. Primary care providers, that is general practice, dentistry, pharmacy and eye care, are important independent contractors who provide nearly £20 billion worth of NHS services, and every year the government consults with general practice and pharmacy sectors. I'll give way.
Minister, thank you very much for your answers to the questions that everyone has asked. One of the questions that comes out of my constituent on a regular basis is the one about the GP surgeries. The national insurance contributions will hit them immensely. They've told me they have a choice. The choice is to reduce staff and cut back on appointments. Ever mindful that the Minister has said 22 billion extra for NHS, but if the impact upon the GP surgeries and the health clinics by reducing staff, reducing their capability of being able to produce and deliver a health service, is this not really, Minister, a step down on what is offered on the ground in my constituency and indeed in all the constituencies? So would the Minister reconsider that in relation to the GP surgeries and the impact upon them in particular?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising the question of GPs and the funding and the support the government is providing to them, because the government is investing an additional £889 million in general practice, which brings the total spend on the GP contract to £13.2 billion in 25-26. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the biggest increase in over a decade, and the changes to the contract will improve services for patients and help make progress towards the government's health mission, shifting from analogue to digital, sickness to prevention, and from hospital to community care, as set out in the Prime Minister's plan for change. So that support for GPs is an essential part of what the budget, including the measures which we're debating in relation to national insurance, delivers. I'll give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. In my constituency of Horsham, Age UK have told me that the employer's NICS rise will cost them £50,000 a year. Would the Minister agree that it is impossible to improve the public sector by taxing the public sector?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we inherited public services that needed urgent support. We inherited public services that were on their knees, and part of the reason why we took those difficult but necessary decisions at the budget last October was, of course, to restore fiscal responsibility, but also to get public services back on their feet. And, this is not just about public services and the services that people across the UK enjoy. It's also about making sure that we have that stability for economic growth. Because if you haven't got a health service that works well, you haven't got a healthy population who can go to work. If you haven't got a transport system that works well, people can't get to work. And so that investment in public services, getting them back on their feet after 14 years of the party opposite being in control, is not only essential for what people in the UK experience, but also to make sure we can have that economic growth which will put more money in people's pockets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to make a little progress. I've spoken about GPs, Madam Deputy Speaker, but of course alongside GPs, the Department for Health and Social Care has also entered into consultation with the Community Pharmacy England regarding the 24-25 and 25-26 community pharmacy contractual framework. The final funding settlement will be announced in the usual way following this consultation.
And the National Pharmacy Association announced for the first time ever in 104 years that they are planning action by reducing services because of the implications of the budget. But one of their requests is the release of an independent report commissioned by NHS England on the future funding of pharmacies. Now that the government is in charge of NHS England, would he speak to his health colleagues to release that report so that before the consultations all finish, so that actually the public and the pharmacies can see exactly what the financial situation of that independent report will be?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and obviously reports which are in relation to work the Department for Health is carrying out is a subject for ministers in that department to answer. But in terms of the funding that I'm speaking to today, as I said, the final funding settlement will be announced in the usual way following the consultation which is underway. Moving on, Madam Deputy Speaker, to dentistry. On dentistry, the NHS in England invests around £3 billion every year. NHS pharmaceutical, ophthalmic and dental allocations for integrated care systems for 25-26 have been published alongside NHS planning guidance. In relation to social care, the government has provided a cash increase in core local government spending power of 6.8% in 25-26, including £880 million of new grant funding provided to social care, funding which can be used to address the range of pressures facing the adult social care sector.
Giving way. The figures that he is presenting, along with the answer that he gave to my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, similar to the Prime Minister, is money going into sectors that actually is not going to mitigate the national insurance rise. So will he actually confirm that sectors like hospices, social care, GPs, pharmacists will actually have some support and not tell us about money that's not going to help them with regard to this jobs tax that's coming in?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the various organisations or services that I'm talking about, whether that's GPs or pharmacies or organisations providing social care, obviously receive money from government. And the way in which those discussions take place is to consider pressures on the providers of those services in the round. And that's the way that the negotiations take place. Now, in terms of direct support for employer national insurance contributions, that obviously applies to central government, local government and public corporations, which is much the same way the previous government approached it under the Health and Social Care levy. In terms of the social care or GPs, as I've been outlining, pressures which they face are considered in the round in terms of their funding settlements. And as I said, in terms of social care, the £880 million of new grant funding is funding which can be used to address the range of pressures facing adult social care. I'll give way.
It sort of makes an interesting point, but if we look at children's hospices are going to be down by £4.9 million. Most of the funding for children's hospices doesn't come from the government, it comes from communities, it comes from people supporting them. Can the Minister at the dispatch box assure those children's hospices, such as Acorns, which is in the West Midlands, that they will not be down by that money that they're going to be losing through extra NI contributions, and that £4.9 million is going to be replaced by the government for children's hospices?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising the issue of hospices, and if I may set out the government's position in terms of hospices as they were referred to in some of the amendments we're considering today. In terms of hospices, the government recognises the vital role that they play in supporting people at the end of life and their families, and also recognises the range of cost pressures that the hospice sector has been facing over a number of years. We're supporting the hospice sector with a £100 million increase for adult and children's hospices to ensure they have the best physical environment for care, and £26 million of revenue to support children's and young people's hospices. Now, the £100 million will go towards helping hospices to improve their buildings, equipment and accommodation to ensure that patients continue to receive the best possible care. I'll give way.
To the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way, but I think the point that we are really trying to emphasise from this side of the House is that the government appears to be giving with one hand but taking away with the other. And the hospice sector is just one example of many sectors that are being adversely affected by the cruel tax that the government is placing on them.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said a few moments ago, the way in which the government supports central government, local government and public corporations, that is departments and other public sector employers, is the same way in which the previous government responded to the health and social care levy, and that is a standard way in which the government offers support in terms of employer national insurance costs. But if I'm speaking, I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to make some progress because I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the government wants to shift healthcare out of hospitals and into the community to ensure patients and their families receive personalised care in the most appropriate setting. I'll give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and can I thank him for doing that. The Southern Area Hospice is located just outside my constituency. They have to raise £3.6 million per year, £300,000 per month. They are not government funded, as has been alluded. What reassurances can he give to those folks in the Southern Area Hospice who are currently using their services for end-of-life care that this government will do the right thing and will support our hospices by not including them in this national insurance contributions increase?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I've explained how the government is approaching employer national insurance contributions and the support that the government offers for central government, for local government and for public corporations. And this is an established way of responding to employer national insurance contribution changes which the previous government did in terms of national insurance. I feel the Honourable Gentleman has been so persistent, he must have an amazing point to make, so I will give way to him. I wait with bated breath.
It's an amazing point, and I hope that the Honourable Gentleman will get it. Because at Prime Minister's question time, it was quite clear that the Prime Minister didn't get it. So let's now tell the real truth. The money that is being given by the government, taxpayers' money, to hospices, children's hospices, like Shooting Star, like Demelza House, is for buildings. The national insurance increase is hitting directly the people that do the work upon which very sick children depend. Why is that imposition being made?
Exactly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the £100 million which the Honourable Member alluded to is important funding to help hospices improve their buildings, their equipment, the accommodation to ensure that patients can receive the best care possible. As I also mentioned a few moments ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be £26 million of revenue to support children and young people's hospices. And more widely, of course, with hospices being charities, the hospices provide support for charities, including hospices, through the wider tax regime, which is amongst the most generous in the world. And this includes tax reliefs to charities and their donors worth just over £6 billion for the tax year to April 2024. And finally, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, all charities, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, including hospices set up as charities, can benefit from the employment allowance, which this bill more than doubles from £5,000 to £10,500. And this will benefit charities of all sizes, and particularly the smallest. I'll give way.
But the Minister knows that this is funding for 1 year, mainly for buildings, as he has admitted. This is going to be a cost on hospices every single year going forward. So it will be something that's cumulative. It means that they have to ask their communities for more and more and more just to give that basic help. So is he going to commit to fund children's hospices by £4.9 million that they're taking off them every single year, or not? Yes or no?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the points that I was making just before I gave way to the Right Honourable Gentleman are recurrent features of the tax system. The support through the tax regime for charities and their donors, worth over £6 billion in April 2024, is a recurrent system, a feature of the system which happens in every year. The increase in the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500, which will benefit hospices set up as charities, is a permanent change. That is one that we're making through this bill to increase the employment allowance. I'm going to make a bit of progress. So I've given way quite. Sorry, is he intervening? Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think, as is evident to many members of this House, the Minister for the first time has found himself not able to answer some very straightforward questions from honourable members on this side of the House, which is the difference between the allocation of funding which is for capital and the allocation of money which is for current expenditures, and the impact that that difference will have on our hospices, on our children's hospices, on our GPs and others affected by Labour's jobs tax. I'm sure members in the House of Lords who brought this amendment back will also have noticed the fact the Minister hasn't been able to answer these questions. So prior to this going back to the House of Lords, will the Minister agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak to the Chancellor or the Chief Secretary to get a clear answer to the questions that have been raised today about which money will be available for capital and which money will be available to offset the National Insurance charge increase?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to hear the right honourable gentleman, promoting you there. I'm sorry to hear the honourable gentleman felt that I was being unclear. I think I was being perfectly clear in the position. He may not agree with the position, as he's entitled to not do so in this chamber, but I think I was being very clear in that the way in which support works in direct response to the employer national insurance contribution changes is the government provides support directly to central government, local government and public corporations, so it's departments and other public sector employers, as was the case under his government when in relation to discussion around the health and social care levy. That does not apply to GPs, to dentists, to hospices and other organisations who we've been discussing today. The important point I was making, which I hope was clear to him and his colleagues on the other side of the House, is about the wider support which the government is providing to hospices, to the funding we're providing to GPs, the discussions we're having with other primary care providers. And that's the context in which this bill has to be seen, because the reason why we're able to take decisions around funding for public services is because of those difficult decisions that we took at the budget last year. And this bill implements one of those decisions. And it was noticeable, Madam Deputy Speaker, at Prime Minister's questions earlier today, that I think when the Prime Minister asked the Leader of the Opposition, whether she would reverse the national insurance rise that we are bringing in through this bill, she refused to commit to that. So I'm unclear exactly how. I'm unclear exactly what the opposition's position is, and I can hear one of the honourable gentlemen saying that he will update me in his speech later. I think, or I may have misheard him there, but I think I heard him say he will confirm later whether the opposition will reverse the national insurance changes we're making or not. I look forward to that update.
Minister, to explain to the House how it is right, as it is, for the government to cover the extra national insurance in the public sector, for example, in hospital provision, but it is not right to do it at end-of-life care in a hospice. How can that circle be squared? That you cover the national insurance for those who are being treated, the hospitals which are treating people, but you won't cover it for the hospices which are seeing end-of-life care.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, in answer to the honourable gentleman's question, the fundamental principle here is about what organisations the government will support in response to the changes to national insurance contributions, and the approach the government is taking, which is in line with the previous government, the approach that they took in the health and social care levy, is that the government provides support for departments and other public sector employers for additional employer national insurance contributions. And as I said to the honourable gentleman, that means central government, public corporations and local government. Primary care providers are independent contractors and will therefore not be exempt from these changes. I'll give way one more time.
Thank you very much. Minister, the Minister makes the point that this is secondary for primary care providers. However, what he doesn't acknowledge is that those primary care providers, as I hear from dentists and community pharmacies and social care providers in my constituency of Bicester and Woodstock, still don't know how they will be compensated by the government. We are very close to the start of the tax year. These are small businesses which are providing critical primary care services into our communities. How can they operate when the Minister obfuscates and says other people might talk to them at a later stage about the money that they might receive? Would it not be easier for the Minister to accept the Liberal Democrat amendment from the House of Lords and clear up this matter today?
Well, for clarity, Madam Deputy Speaker, the response in regards of other primary care providers who are independent contractors is not for direct support in the way the government provides it for departments and other public sector employers. Those pressures which they will face are considered in the round alongside all of the other pressures which they face, and that's taken into consideration in the funding which is provided to them. So it's a different way of that solution being arrived at than the honourable gentleman suggested in his question. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, looking across the debate that we're having today, as I set out earlier, the revenue raised by the decisions in this bill will help to fund public services, including the NHS and other social care providers. And the proposals in these amendments would put much of that funding at risk. And so to support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises on that point.
For giving way. What advice then would you be able to give to Thames Hospice and Alexander Devine Children's Hospice in Maidenhead, who are looking at a £300,000 and a £50,000 increase in bills respectively? Is he saying that they should be cutting services, or is he expecting our residents in our constituencies to raise more money for these hospices to give it directly back to the Chancellor?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I clearly don't know the situation of that particular hospice, so I'm not going to give them direct advice about how to manage their operations. But more generally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the government's approach to providing direct support for departments and other public sector employers. And of course, it depends in terms of how hospice care is provided, because in many cases, integrated care boards are responsible for the commissioning of palliative and end-of-life care services to meet the needs of local populations. And so where hospices are commissioned by the NHS for their work, then contractual arrangements should be discussed with the integrated care board at a local level. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll give way one more time.
Minister for giving way. He's got a capital budget, he's got revenue budgets. This is a small amount of money, £4-5 million. Would he take away from this debate today and look at whether switching £4 or £5 million from the capital budget to the revenue budget and trying to open up that opportunity is something that would have merit and would really help these very vulnerable organisations?
Hear, hear. Well said.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the government's approach to supporting departments and other public sector employers with the changes to employer national insurance contributions. As I said earlier in remarks to his front bench, this is the same approach that his government took in relation to the health and social care levy. And we are talking about the pressures, the wider pressures that other organisations, be that GPs or hospices and so on, face, and what we can do to support them, and the processes through which they go to consider the pressures on them in the round. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've made quite considerable number of points, I think, in relation to these amendments 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13. And in light of these points, I would urge the House to disagree with those amendments. I will now turn to other Lords' amendments, Madam Deputy Speaker, relating to charities and local government, including special educational needs transport. First, Amendments 2, 7, 12 and 16 seek to exempt charities from the changes to employer national insurance contributions rates and thresholds in this bill. The government recognises the crucial role that charities play in our society. We recognise the need to protect the smallest charities, which is why we have more than doubled the employment allowance to £10,500, meaning that more than half of businesses, including charities, with national insurance liabilities either gain or see no change next year. As I previously noted, it is important to recognise that all charities can benefit from the employment allowance. As I've also previously noted, the government provides wider support for charities via the tax regime, with tax relief to charities and their donors worth just over £6 billion for the tax year to April 2024. Again, Madam Deputy Speaker, the proposals in these amendments would put much of the funding this bill seeks to raise for public services at risk, and so to support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending or other tax rises. I'll now turn to Amendments 3, 6, 11 and 15. I'll give way.
To the Minister giving way. After yesterday's announcement with regards to the benefit changes and benefit cuts, the government have said they want to see more people going into work. Now, a lot of the support is delivered by charities to help people to get into work, so we're expecting more need for the charities. How are they likely to cope if they're being taxed with this further nix? Because they're going to look to reduce the services and the ability to provide. So there's going to be a gap in the market there. Could you explain how the government intends to breach that gap?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for drawing attention to the very important reforms that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, set out in this House yesterday, a crucial part of getting people back into work. Now, of course, further details will be set out on interventions to help people back into work. We recognise that charities, in some cases, may provide that support, and that's why many of the elements of support within the tax regime for charities remain so generous. £6 billion for the tax relief for charities and their donors for the tax year to April 2024, through features which are continuing in the year which we're entering into. The employment allowance doubling from £5,000 to £10,500. As I said, that doubling, that more than doubling of the employment allowance will benefit all charities in this country. And so I think some of those changes that we've made to the employment allowance are ones which charities, particularly small charities, will benefit very directly from. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, sorry. Sorry, I was seeking to give way, but I thought you were going to intervene on me, Madam Deputy Speaker. Oh, right, yes, sorry, yes. I will in that case not take any more interventions, and I will make more speedy progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was going to address Amendments 3, 6, 11 and 15 because, Madam Deputy Speaker, these relate to employers who provide transport for children with special educational needs. Of course, in the budget and the recent provisional local government finance settlement, the government announced £2 billion of grant funding for local government in 25-26, and this includes £515 million to support councils with the increase in employer national insurance contributions. That funding is not ring-fenced, and it is for local authorities to determine how to use that funding across relevant services and responsibilities. Turning very briefly to Amendments 8, 10, 14, 17, 18 and 19, which together seek to maintain the current thresholds for businesses employing fewer than 25 staff. Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to protecting the smallest businesses, the government is taking action through this bill by, as I have already mentioned, increasing the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500. This means next year 865,000 employers will pay no national insurance at all, and more than half will see no change or gain overall from this package. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will address Amendment 21, which requires the government to conduct assessments on the economic and sectoral impacts of this bill. As we've discussed previously in this place, the government has already published an assessment of this policy in HMRC's Tax Information and Impact Note. This note sets out that as a result of the measures in this bill, around 250,000 employers will see their secondary Class 1 national insurance contributions liability decrease, and around 940,000 will see it increase. Around 820,000 will see no change. The OBR's economic and fiscal outlook also sets out the expected macroeconomic impacts of the changes to employer national insurance contributions. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope honourable and right honourable members will understand why we are not supporting these amendments from the other place. This bill makes some of the difficult but necessary decisions that we, as a government, have had to take to fix the public finances and to get public services back on their feet. The amendments from the other place require information that has already been provided, do not recognise other policies the government has in place, or, most seriously, undermine the funding this bill seeks to secure. I therefore respectfully propose that this House disagree to these amendments, and I urge all honourable and right honourable members to support the government in making that so.
This debate has to conclude within the 2 hours that it started, so other than the front benches, the back benches will only have a 6-minute time limit. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1, and I call the Shadow Minister, Gareth Davies.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise on behalf of the official opposition in support of Lords Amendments 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 10, 14 and 21. But before I dive into the detail, I want to get a little nostalgic, because 1 year and 6 days ago, I opened the second reading of the 2024 Conservative National Insurance Contributions Bill, which cut national insurance for some 29 million working people across the country. What a difference a year makes. At the end of my speech that day, I posed a simple question to the Shadow Minister, now Exchequer Secretary, that was really bugging me at the time. How are Labour going to pay for all of their many spending commitments? I asked specifically what taxes they will put up and call for them to just be straight with the British people. Alas, no straight answer was forthcoming. But now we know the answer, don't we? It's just a shame they only gave it to us after the general election. Madam Deputy Speaker, they promised not to raise national insurance. They promised that they were on the side of British business. They said that they would deliver economic growth. How's that going? But the fact is, this Chancellor is delivering a £25 billion tax rise on jobs across the country that will stifle growth, hold back British business and harm public services. This is a Labour national insurance bill which will take the tax burden unbelievably to the highest level in history on the backs of working people. Now, today we're debating a series of amendments laid down and voted through in the other place with the aim of mitigating at least some of the damage to three vital parts of our economy and our communities. These are healthcare providers, charities and small businesses. Lord's Amendments 1, 3 and 4 seek to exempt care providers, NHS GP practices, NHS commissioned dentists, NHS commissioned pharmacists, providers of transport for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and charitable providers of health and social care, such as hospices, as we've been hearing about so far. This is because we have been warned that as a direct result of the national insurance tax hikes, we could see fewer GP appointments, reduced access to NHS dentistry, community pharmacies closing, adults and local authorities paying more for social care, and young working families being hit with even higher childcare costs. We have to avoid this.
Or member for giving way. Can he state whether or not he reversed the national insurance tax change that we have, and indeed what spending he would cut on the other side to do so?
Well, I'm very grateful for the intervention. If he looks back on the record of the stages of this bill, we voted against it. If he looks at our record in government, he'll see that we cut national insurance, as I say, for 29 million people across the country. And as I have said so many times in this place, why are we even debating the fact that they've created an £8 billion quango in GB Energy? Why are they spending £7 billion on a rebrand of the UK Infrastructure Bank? Why are they spending £9 billion on giving up our sovereignty to Mauritius? Let's start with those discussions and then we can have a real debate. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, Lord's Amendment 2 recognises the role that the voluntary sector plays in the provision of essential services by exempting charities with an annual revenue of less than £1 million from the national insurance rate. Those charities with an income of less than £1 million make up some 95% of registered charities. They undertake vital work in all of our communities, yet this Chancellor will force charity staff and volunteers across the sector to have to raise £1.4 billion more to cover this tax rise just next year alone. Supporting this amendment will save so many services currently provided by the third sector from being reduced or even removed altogether. Lord's Amendments 8, 10 and 14 seek to exempt the smallest businesses, those with fewer than 25 full-time employees, from the proposed cut to the threshold at which an employer is required to pay second-class 1 national insurance.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
Of course.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he mentioned small businesses. Local hairdressers in my constituency of Chichester have been in touch with me to say that with the difficult economic picture, these NICS rises will mean that this year they won't be able to take on apprentices. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that this NICS rise is not just a tax on business, it's actually a tax on education as well?
Absolutely. the profound impact of this tax is not appreciated, I think, if I'm being fair, is not appreciated by the Labour front bench. And the Honourable Lady points out yet another area, tax on education. I could talk about universities and the impact on them as well. Of course.
Do you think does he think the government has assessed the loss of tax revenue as a result of this measure? In North Yorkshire, almost all of the jobs that would have been created over the coming year are now being repressed within these small businesses and leading to a loss of income for the Exchequer.
Answer it simply. I don't think they did before announcing this tax rise, but I think as we look at plummeting business confidence, if we look at declining economic growth and forecasts that are consistently downgraded for economic growth, the profound impact, as I was saying before, on businesses and economic growth is clear for all to see. Go on then, yes.
Now is a moment. I listened carefully to your answer to my honourable friend's question about what you would cut if this was to be reversed, which you haven't been clear about if you would, but I listened carefully to the answer. And what I heard you say was you talked... Sorry. I am so sorry. And what I heard the Shadow Minister say was that he would... what I heard the Shadow Minister say is referring to GB Energy and also to the National Wealth Fund. So what I would really like to understand in the Shadow Minister's future remarks is the Shadow Minister really saying that he wants to reverse record levels of investment in energy infrastructure and innovation jobs and record levels of investment in jobs across this country to stabilise our economy into the future?
Be reminded that interventions should not be short speeches, and she's absolutely right. Looking at the chair should helpfully prevent her from saying the word "you" repeatedly. Gareth.
I think the problem with that intervention is the chairman of GB Energy himself disagrees with the proposed number of jobs that it supposedly will be creating. But I've set out very clearly some of the things of what we would do differently and the choices that we would make that are different to the choices that this Labour government are making. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we talk about small businesses and the impact on businesses as a whole of this national insurance tax increase, the Minister and other members opposite incorrectly suggest that only the largest businesses will be forced to pay this jobs tax. But as I've told them consistently at every stage of this debate, that is simply not the case. A village butcher, a high street hair salon, community pharmacies, these are not what most people would regard as large businesses. Yet businesses like these will be hit. If the government really wants to ensure that our smallest businesses are exempt from at least part of the damaging tax, they should support the Lord's amendments today.
Yes. I thank the honourable friend for giving way, and I sort of look across the chamber at the Minister, and, we know he's having to defend the undefendable, really. He's sort of got a certain Matt Hancock about him in how he does it with a zeal. But he does it... sorry, Madam Deputy. But would the Shadow Minister agree with me that actually the people who are paying for these increases are taxpayers? They're people who are working hard. Because I was talking to a manufacturing business in my constituency who are going to give their employees a 4.5% increase and now can only afford to give them a 2% increase. This is coming out of the pockets of hard-working people.
Members should not be reminded the language should be respectful at all times.
The jungle awaits the Minister, clearly. He is absolutely right. My right honourable friend is absolutely right. And in fact, the OBR have demonstrated clearly in their analysis that 76% of this tax increase will be passed on to working people, a manifesto breach if ever I saw one. Yeah. But not only that, the IFS have made clear that it isn't just working people that this will have an impact on. It's the lowest paid. It is the most lowest paid the least paid in our country that will be paying for this. And I think, again, that is an underappreciated and under-commented fact from the party opposite.
It's worse than that, isn't it? Because the money that's being paid to bail out Demelza House Children's Hospice, Shooting Star Children's Hospice, is being generously donated by people who've already paid tax. So those working people are effectively being taxed twice on the money that they are generously giving to support some of the most needy children in this country in terms of health. Is that not absolutely appalling?
I'll just leave it with yes, it is. He's exactly right. They are giving with one hand, they're giving a small amount with one hand and taking a larger amount with the other, but the bottom line is it's all taxpayer money. It is a double tax on those people who are now facing the brunt of this. I'll just make some progress if you allow me, and then I'll give way in a bit. This tax, purely and simply, is a financial penalty. That's how I look at it. On 940,000 businesses. And on average, the analysis shows that this is going to cost businesses £26,000 per year per employer. Not content with ruining the future of the immoral family farm tax, the Chancellor wants to hammer farmers today too with this bill. The Chancellor is going to make pubs and cafes and restaurants stump up more to cover her jobs tax without regard of the impact on our high streets or the communities that they serve. She's going to squeeze the creative industries from theatres to film producers in a desperate attempt to keep this circus on the road. It's crucial that we understand the impact this bill will have. It's why Lord's Amendment 21 requires the Chancellor to carry out a review of the impact of this bill within 6 months on the sectors I've already described, but also on farming, creative industries, hospitality, retail, and universities.
I thank him for giving way. I mean, he mentions cafes. I've raised Basil's Cafe and Tunbridge before in the House on exactly this point. They now inform me that they're having to put their prices up because of the NIC rises. Does the Shadow Minister think that we're actually going to see a bump in the inflation figures as a result of this tax?
The honourable gentleman for his intervention. I'll remind the House that inflation has gone from 2% to 3% already under this Labour government. In fact, the OBR scored the budget, the Halloween budget, as being inflationary. And he is right. When these tax rises hit, they will be passed on. And they will be passed on through higher prices, which inevitably, I hope not, but will inevitably put pressure on inflation. But it's the combination of factors in addition on businesses that I think is not always appreciated as well on cafes. It's the national living wage going up, which we on this side have welcomed. We implemented it, but it's the context in which that is going up, with national insurance on the rise, with business rates relief for hospitality businesses and high streets reduced from 70% to 40%. All of these things are compounding the impact on cafes like the honourable gentleman in his constituency that will be devastating and will inevitably lead to job freezes or job losses, which I'll come on to. Madam Deputy Speaker, from healthcare to charities to SMEs, I've made the consequences clear right from the start of this bill in the House. And today, the government really does have one more chance to change course. Because what many people across the country want to know is, what is this for? We were told that it was a one-off tax rise to fix the foundations of the economy. We were told that there would be no more tax rises after this. And yet we find ourselves just a week away from an emergency budget with speculation rife that other taxes may have to rise because the Chancellor will not meet her own new fiscal rules. Some are suggesting that Labour will break another pre-election promise and not unfreeze the income tax thresholds in 2028, but rather extend the freeze to pay down their new debts. This surely cannot be true. The Minister himself gave me his personal assurance in this House that income tax thresholds would be unfrozen from 2028.
Not looking you in the eye.
I'd like the Minister to reconfirm that promise to me today to end that speculation. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is vital context for members as we consider the amendments today. If more tax rises will be needed, if the original justification for this bill is now void, then why should we stomach their terrible consequences? Why should Labour MPs have to go out and defend this to their constituents? Why should we allow the government to still punish the sectors which the amendments before us seek to protect? In fact, why must we stand here and see this entire bill implemented at all? Because one impact that hits every sector of our economy is the impact on jobs. Just yesterday, we heard Labour talk about the importance of lifting people out of welfare and getting them back into work. They are right to do that. As Conservatives, we know the dignity of work, the security of a regular paycheck is what lifts us up as a country and lifts families out of poverty. But the tragedy is that this bill has caused so much concern and so much uncertainty that employment is already declining in anticipation of its passage. And the OBR tell us that it will depress workforce participation for years to come. Put simply, this government is cutting welfare to boost employment, while at the same time boosting taxes which will cut jobs. No wonder business confidence has completely and utterly nosedived. It is inexplicable and entirely avoidable. The Minister,
He says it's inexplicable, and I agree on the face of it, it is. But isn't one possible explanation for the fiscal misadventure on this scale is because of a government whose benches are filled with people who have scarcely any understanding of the real economy, much less what it means to try and start, run and sustain a business?
This is right, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an important point, because the decisions that are made by this government are having such a profound impact on people in the real economy. And what I would simply say to the British public is that if you are unhappy with the decisions that are being made, you have to change the people who are making them. But the profound impact, as I say, I'm getting, unbelievably, I'm getting heckled on this point. She should get out and talk to the average business person in her constituency. I think she might quieten down quite significantly. The Minister implied that they had no choice. He may still seek to ask me what we would do differently, and others are trying on the opposite benches, implying that there's no other alternative. But he should look at the £70 billion of wasteful spending commitments that I've already listed, the quangos like GB Energy, the payoffs to the unions without any reform or productivity gains, or as I said before, the billions of pounds that are being surrendered as part of the surrender deal to Mauritius. With growth on the decline, inflation, debt and unemployment on the rise, a Chancellor on the brink and confidence crumbling, we may not be able to kill this bill, but we have our chance now to dent the damage. I urge ministers and members across the House to do the right thing and support these amendments today.
Due to the length of front bench contributions, backbenchers are now limited to 5 minutes. Dr. Jeevun Sandher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to rise and speak today to Amendments 1 to 19. And today I want to speak about what makes a good tax system and particularly optimal tax theory, a topic that is as thrilling to me as it is to no doubt this entire chamber and this entire House. Now, a good tax system, Madam Deputy Speaker, is defined by neutrality, simplicity and stability, as is set out in the Merleys Review. A tax system designed along these three principles will raise the maximum revenue with the minimum economic impact. Now, each of these amendments in isolation today may seem reasonable, but together they introduce individual exemptions that make our tax system less neutral, less simple and less stable. Madam Deputy Speaker, these amendments would make our tax system worse. Now, we today are discussing raising national insurance contributions from the largest employers to fix our broken public services and invest in our prosperity. £23 billion of investment, 3/4 from the richest 2% of businesses, also whilst reducing contributions from the 250,000 smallest businesses. Yes, I'll give way.
For giving way. He talks about simplicity. If that is the case, why is he splitting the NICs? He could have introduced an increase on employees at the same time as making the increase on employers, except they've decided not to do that. That would have been a very simple measure to raise the taxes, which doesn't create this complication. How does that tally with his theory?
I say, the Honourable Member, it's a pretty well-established, if you like, introduction to the tax system, now both employee and employer NICs. In terms of the actual simplicity, it's about where it is levied. But I will come on to the specific point that he raises later on in the speech and hopefully provide some illumination on this point. The revenue we're raising here is used to invest in our nation's prosperity, insulating our homes, rebuilding our crumbling schools, hiring more nurses to care for our loved ones. It's getting costs down, it's creating good jobs, and it's rebuilding this country, frankly, from over a decade of despondency and despair. But the amendments today before us, they represent bad policy that puts this at risk. Now, as I may have mentioned this House once or twice before, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did used to be an economist. And I could say to you now that a good tax is one that raises revenue and does not introduce perverse incentives. It ensures that resources goes to activity because there are higher levels of productivity. And a good tax system does introduce three principles in a moment, if you may. Firstly, neutrality. It treats similar activities in similar ways. Secondly, simplicity. It's straightforward and easy to implement. And thirdly, stability. It is predictable. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. I'm wondering if he's talking about productivity and growth, how he squares that with the additional tax on early years, which are allowing parents to be able to work. If parents aren't able to work and these employers can't afford to bring these young people through, how are we going to get the nation working? Nurseries are on their knees and they can't actually take on more children because there are very strict rules about ratios and about the amount of space each child takes.
Very well. Well, firstly, to the Honourable Member, what I would say is more funding going into early years, and on the tax side, I will deal with this now when I come to speak to the specific amendments. Now, each of these amendments, it seeks to carve out an exemption for something. And I'm sure that people across this House identify, indeed support, some of those individual exemptions. But if we were to pass them, they would give specified sectors advantages not enjoyed by others. I will give way.
Member, it seems to me that his issue isn't with some of these amendments, it's with all of them taken together. So why doesn't he back some of the amendments?
Because that introduces exemptions and perverse incentives and introduces a less clear tax system. It makes the tax system as a whole less efficient. And I'll come to the specific ways in it will. I'll make a little bit of progress and then I will give way. Let's start with non-neutrality. Clauses 7, 12 and 16 create non-neutrality between small charities and non-charities. It thereby incentivises more activity from social enterprises to go as charities instead of businesses. Clauses 8, 10 and 14 an initial NICS bans for small businesses, thereby disincentivising them from growing. Because now if you were, under these amendments, to see your revenue go over £1 million, or employ more than 25 people, you all of a sudden incur a NICS charge. It's a cliff edge. It introduces a perverse incentive, it reduces productivity, it reduces economic growth. I will give way to the Honourable Member if she still wishes.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way, and I'm pleased that he's talking about growth. But he talks about perverse incentives. What possible kind of perverse incentive could he have in mind about removing a jobs tax from a children's hospice, which care for children and families going through the most unspeakable heartbreak? Where's the perverse incentive in that?
As I think I have set out to the Honourable Member, the question is not about carving out an exemption for this establishment or that establishment. It's about how do you create a tax system overall that is simple and efficient. It's ensuring that actually you are having businesses and other organisations operating more efficiently. But I would also say this to the Honourable Member. When they were in government, they did not propose abolishing national insurance for all hospices. Follow your argument to the end of the line. If I may move forward a little bit from the honourable members, I am conscious of the time. This bill also creates more or less simplicity, rather, in the taxes, the amendment. We're not exempting specific sectors and decent establishments from this tax. And overall, all of the amendments, 1 to 19, all of them complicate the tax system and create less stability. Raising rates is accepted policy. Introducing special rates for specific sectors or establishments is not. It makes for a less efficient tax system, complicated to govern, expensive to enforce, and more prone to fraud. This is not a predictable way to make tax policy. Not neutral, not simple, not stable. Bad policy that all of us in this House should oppose. And while all of this sounds dry, it does matter to our constituents, because bad taxes don't just harm economic growth, they bring in less revenue. That means less appointments for the NHS, it means less new teachers, and it means less insulation in our homes. We are elected to this place as legislators. We have a duty to make policy that works. And part of that is seeing the whole from its parts. Ensure we don't introduce loopholes and carve-outs that weaken our tax system, and governing responsibly. Thank you.
Order. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following on from the previous speaker, let me just say, I think the amendments we have received from the other place are clearly not designed with the aim of having a simpler tax system, but they have been sent to us to consider inasmuch as they may create a fairer society. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think should be a driving force in our consideration of these amendments today and the work of this House. Such is the strength of feeling from the other place that they have sent 21 amendments to this place, and such is the strength of feeling on our Liberal Democrat benches that we will support every single one. Taken together, they provide exemptions for health and care providers, for small charities with an annual revenue of less than £1 million, for transport providers for children with special educational needs and disabilities, for small businesses with fewer than 25 employees.
Right honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Thank you so much for giving way. In my own constituency of Torbay, the hospice of Rowcroft is very impacted by these proposals, as is Baycare, that is an excellent provider of social care. Both of these organisations are having to make really challenging and difficult decisions about how many people they can employ and how they can support people in the communities. Do you share fears, does my colleague share fears that I have that this will result on cost shunting onto our core NHS services?
I thank my honourable friend for that fantastic intervention, and yes, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that one of the major problems with this particular measure is it is so self-defeating, and it is effectively robbing Peter to pay Paul. I've said it once before and I'll say it again, this jobs tax is damaging to growth and self-defeating for our health and care services. We Liberal Democrats have opposed this measure, and throughout the debate we have put forward alternative ways for the government to raise the same amount of revenue, fairer ways in which to do it. But we have also asked that if the government is going to pursue this measure, that at the very least they exempt health and care providers. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government will not get hospitals out of a financial hole by taxing GPs and dentists and pharmacies and care providers who stop people from going into hospitals in the first place. The government will not alleviate the pressure on hospitals by taxing hospices who are now going to be forced to withdraw services from people who are trying to die with independence and dignity in a setting of their choosing rather than in a cramped hospital corridor or a sterile ward. The government will not keep people out of hospitals if they levy a tax on the very health and care charities that provide vital services for vulnerable people. They provide warm spaces, friendship isolation services, financial advice, welfare support, and social care. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister said that there would be extra money going into social care, but we know that the money allocated in the budget for social care is dwarfed by this increase in national insurance contributions, and we cannot save the NHS unless we fix social care. I will.
Thank you. You talk about social care, and there are so many examples, but in Hertfordshire we have Quantum Care, which is a not-for-profit social business, which has said the cost will go up by 1.7 million on national insurance contributions alone, and that will impact also the council and social services that are being provided, and really not solving the problem of our health and social care. Would the right honourable member agree with me of this?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and as a fellow Hertfordshire MP, I've met with Quantum Care a number of times and have heard from them as she has too. And it is incredibly worrying for our social care providers, and they are very clear about the impact that this measure is going to have. They will have to put up their costs, they will have to hand back contracts to local authorities, and they will not be able to provide the level of care that many vulnerable people require. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is also going to have a huge impact on small businesses and high streets. And we know that for many people around the country, as I said before, high streets are the most visual and visceral indicator of whether the economy is working in their area. And if they see their high streets going down the pan, then they will lose confidence in their local economy. Our pubs, our hospitality companies, our retail, beauty salons, soft day centres, they are the glue that hold our communities together, but they are also the engine of local growth. And small businesses are crying out right now, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it is the cumulative impact of all of the measures that we're seeing from this government that make them feel overwhelmed. The national insurance contributions, the business rate bills going up, and the new obligations from the employment bill without the resources to manage them. Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the passage of this bill, we Liberal Democrats have set out alternative ways for the government to raise funds. They could look, as we know, that they say it will raise 25 billion for the NHS, but the OBR says that accounting for behaviour change and reimbursing public sector, that will be just £10 billion. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we believe that that money could be raised from different sources, from looking at the digital services tax to the gaming tax to reforming capital gains tax in a way that is fairer and raises more money than the way in which the government has addressed it. So to conclude, this measure and these measures will destroy growth, they could decimate parts of our high streets, and they'll see vulnerable people lose out on vital services. It is why we Liberal Democrats have opposed this increase in the jobs tax, and it is why we ask at the very least for an exemption for our valuable health and care providers.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wanted to focus specifically on Lord's Amendment 21, which is about a review of this policy. But I will come on to the practical reasons why I oppose that amendment shortly. And I wanted to focus on the cause of the problem and the cause of the debate that we're having today. The previous government presided over economic chaos, scaring businesses away from long-term investments. Previous government failed to invest in the skills needed for the vital sectors that we've been hearing about today. And the previous government left the NHS on its knees in desperate need for long-term investment. It is hard to make the serious and difficult steps we need to get this country back on its feet. But I do believe that the measures that we're debating today are necessary. So what a contrast we have now. A government laser-focused on economic stability, a government determined to invest in skills for the future, and a government already reducing the NHS waiting list thanks to £23 billion of investment That is the outcome of this policy. This policy is part of a package of measures to stabilise our economy and invest in the public services that I have to admit I have been struck by the passion and commitment of members across this House talking about really important public services. I regularly speak to those myself, and I firmly believe that the investment that this government will be able to make in public services, in childcare, in early years, in those breakfast clubs, in the NHS, back into local government where it needs to be, will make, in the round, a more sustainable public service, which is what we so desperately need. Now, to the practical reasons for why I am opposed to this amendment. The OBR has already considered the implications of this policy. There is publicly available jobs data, I won't give away, publicly available jobs data already available, which will enable everybody to analyse the impact of this policy, and there's already been a detailed assessment in the HMRC policies. I firmly believe that this amendment won't deliver on the objectives that our country needs. Thank you very much.
Dame Caroline Dinenage.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of these amendments and would direct the House to my register of members' interests. I want to talk about the services that are so integral to our communities because they're the ones that our constituents rely on. I'm talking about GP surgeries, dental practices, pharmacies. I'm talking about our community hospices, the charity hospices that care for our loved ones through the most difficult and heartbreaking of times. The hospices that our constituents work so hard to raise the funds to keep going, including our children's hospices. I listen very hard to what the Minister says, and he talks really dispassionately about difficult decisions. Has he no shame? Has he no shame? This is a choice, and they have chosen to make these job taxes imposed on children's hospices, the services which support families going through the most unimaginably difficult and painful times. Of course I will.
Wendy, the Right Honourable Lady speaks with so much knowledge and passion and is a real advocate for her constituents. When we look across the chamber, does she agree with me, though, that the benches are threadbare? Is that because it's testament to the fact that the benches opposite are actually trying to defend the indefensible?
Yeah. Absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look at this. There's over 400 Labour MPs, and look, 4 of them sitting there trying to defend this indefensible policy, this indefensible jobs tax on our most vulnerable. They should be utterly ashamed of themselves. Have they not got children's hospices in their constituencies? Have they not got hospices and other settings that their constituents work so hard to fundraise for? They should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Perhaps I can suggest an easy decision rather than a difficult decision. Don't give £9 billion away to Mauritius and instead use some of it to support social care and charities.
I think that's an excellent decision. I'm sure the Naomi House Children's Hospice and Jack's Place, which do so much invaluable work to support families going through the most unspeakable difficulties in my area, would advocate for that. I want to talk about childcare settings who ensure that our smallest but our most cherished family members are cared for and given the very best possible start in life. It's incomprehensible that the government has taken this decision to imperil some of the businesses and services that our constituents most rely on. Nursing homes, for example. One nursing home with 35 years of service in the Gosport constituency told me that the tax rises in the budget mean that they're going to see £90,000 on top of their annual costs. This business is particularly vulnerable because a very large proportion of their bed spaces are occupied by local authority patients. Their costs are going to go up by 12% this year, driven mostly by changes to the minimum wage and this jobs tax, this national insurance contribution for his 75 members of staff. The council, having difficulties of their own, can only provide 4% uplift to cover it. It's quite simply an existential threat to his business, and he's not alone. It's the elderly, the vulnerable, the disabled people and their families who are going to pay the price. And we know that the costs will go on to those who are having to foot the bill. If people are not privately funded, some nursing homes will be forced to hand back their local authority contracts and increase the proportion of beds commissioned privately. So since the budget, I've received messages from individuals who've already seen the cost of care going through the roof. One wrote to me, and I quote, "Directly due to the increases in employer national insurance contributions by the Chancellor, they've managed to cause an increase of 7.8% in my brother's care home fees that are already north of £8,000 a month." He says, "I shudder to think of the overall cost nationally of this increase across all those with relatives and loved ones in care." I'd also like to talk about early years settings. Early years providers are also facing a squeeze that many just won't be able to stomach. Just as care settings have their revenue dictated by local government, nurseries are limited by childcare ratios and the fees that they get from their local authority for their 30 hours free childcare. Hopscotch Nursery, who look after 1,900 children across my local region, have told me that these changes will add £1 million to their overheads. They say that to make up that shortfall, they're going to have to put their fees up by 10%. That's 10% that will be passed on to my Gosport constituents. How can parents in Gosport face an uptick in fees like that? What assessment has the government made on what impact this will take on parents, on what impact it will take on people dropping out of the jobs market, dropping out of the workforce, and most especially on women? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to childcare, we all know, rightly or wrongly, the buck always stops with us. What will be the disproportionate impact of this on them? I could mention so many other organisations who are facing the prospect of scaling back their activities. Hair and beauty salons who are warning that this is going to result in billions lost, and many will shut up shop or encourage their staff to go freelance. And many, meanwhile, of course, they've previously taken on so many apprentices, and they warn by 2027 there'll be no apprenticeships left in this sector because it will be too expensive. The common thread is that this national insurance change will hit businesses for whom labour is the highest cost, where there is no digital solution, and businesses who are not able to find efficiencies because of the nature of their overheads. The amendments passed in the Lords will go some way towards alleviating those cost pressures. In many cases, they are a lifeline for the businesses and services that our constituents so desperately rely on, and who by their very nature are reliant on the public sector for revenue. I urge the Minister to change his mind, to show some compassion, to show some care, to listen to his constituents, and to support these amendments.
Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm on record previously as calling for more support for hospices, but I've been contacted by a number of constituents regarding the issue of home-to-school transport for SEND pupils and the related amendments 3, 6, 11 and 15, and it's those that I wish to consider today. For many children with special educational needs and disabilities, their school transport is a lifeline to education, friendships and independence. Without it, these children risk being cut off, left behind and denied opportunities they deserve. If these Lords' amendments are rejected, local councils and transport providers will struggle, families will face uncertainty, and the fundamental right to education, I believe, will be compromised. So this is not just a technical change to national insurance rates and thresholds. It's a direct threat to the futures of vulnerable children and their families. These dry words on a page have a massive impact in the world outside this place. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a genuine fear that the cost of removing the amendments, which will ultimately see more children kept out of school, will actually be greater than the additional revenue raised through the national insurance changes. In reality, to exempt school SEND transport from the national insurance rise is not going to bankrupt the UK. We know local councils, even with additional funding, are already struggling with the impact of 14 years of austerity. I believe we could certainly raise the money we need if we had a wealth tax and introduced other changes to capital gains tax as well. So I would appreciate it if the Minister could explain why we are unable to compromise on this issue and find a way to exempt SEND school transport from the changes he proposes.
Excuse me. Dave Doogan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's almost 3 months to the day we were back here in this chamber at third reading, and the SNP and other parties warned at that stage of the dire consequences for very real organisations, businesses, charities, hospices, etc. And it gives certainly me, and I don't think anybody else on this side, any pleasure that those threats have come to pass. There's no pleasure in that whatsoever. The British Chamber of Commerce spoke last month of a powder keg of costs for businesses, with 82% of firms surveyed saying that they faced the potential of staff layoffs, wage freezes or promotions within the workforce cancelled, a terrible drag on the economy that will attend to. Last month saw vacancies in the UK contract at the second fastest rate in nearly 5 years, while wage growth has slumped to an almost 4-year low. If you want the evidence of what business thinks of this change, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's there in those figures. 300,000 small business owners surveyed last month say they intend to lay off employees to cope with Labour's national insurance increase. The economic impact of this is now becoming absolutely clear. Last week's GDP figures show the UK economy shrinking in January, and on Monday of this week the OECD downgraded the growth forecasts for the UK both this year and next. The reality under Labour is that economic growth has fallen in 4 of the last 7 months. And this national insurance grab, it represents an extraordinary and unforced error in fiscal policy. If Labour genuinely has the confidence in this move, then they should have no issue whatsoever in agreeing to Lord's Amendment 21 and publishing an impact assessment of their national increase. What the Minister detailed as an impact assessment was in fact an analysis. An impact assessment deals not with the numbers but with the output in the real economy, the effect on business, and the Minister knows fine that's not what he's talking about. In terms of GPs and Amendments 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13, the Scottish Government will be investing, or compensating rather, £13.6 million in general practice this financial year to support GPs in Scotland alone, obviously, to retain and recruit staff in the face of this change. But Scotland's GPs, any more than England's, Wales or Northern Ireland's GPs, should not be paying the price for UK Government decisions. Labour's decisions to increase national insurance contributions are a catastrophe for GP practices and for charities across Scotland. Relevant to Amendments 2, 7, 12 and 16, 7,000 charities in Scotland at risk from this Labour government. MacCleary facing a £2.9 million inflation to their on-costs. £75 million across the charitable sector in Scotland. The Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals alone exposed to a £400,000 recurring pressure from this Labour government. Scotland's public sector faces a £700 million recurring pressure, which with the government's compensation still leaves a £200 million shortfall. Scotland is again being punished for choosing to invest more in our public services and paying people who deliver those services better. The government regularly attacks us for saying, well, what would you do? Well, I would tell you what I will do. £30 billion by rejoining the single market, £16 billion by introducing Scottish income tax rates, and £43 billion for a wealth tax of 1% on assets over £10 million. But this Labour government won't go after multi-millionaires, Madam Deputy Speaker. They'd far rather go after the disabled, or hospices, or family businesses, or GPs, or farmers, or councils, or charities. That's what these so-called socialists are intent on doing. So, in conclusion, Labour's fiscal bonfire is what my colleagues in the Scottish Government have had to deal with, to try and ameliorate and to protect communities from Labour's economic ineptitude. But even fiscally incompetent unionists, a cadre in whose number I include the Minister, must realise that the Scottish Parliament cannot simply exist to ameliorate and protect Scottish public services from the United Kingdom's decisions. Devolution can only ever be a temporary facelift for the crumbling foundations of unionism. And as the union crumbles, I shed no tears, but I wish it wasn't ripping the economic heart out of Scotland on its way down. Thank you.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to just start with a gentle reminder, if it's needed, that Labour promised in their manifesto not to raise national insurance. And yet we're here today because Labour broke this promise. And we're here today because right honourable members in the other place put down some very important amendments to this bill, which now, rightly, are here for us to consider. Let's also not forget it's Labour colleagues who voted against protecting small family businesses, against protecting hospices, against protecting GPs, against protecting care providers, against protecting small charities, including air ambulances, against protecting providers of school transport for children with SEND, and against protecting nurseries. Now they all face the job tax.
For my right honourable friend Lamb.
Of course.
Grateful to my right honourable friend. My right honourable friend will recall that in his speech earlier, the honourable member for Loughborough referred to perverse incentives. Is it not perverse that this government should, while exempting the health service, be taxing doctors and dentists and hospices and children's hospices, which are all part, effectively, of that same health service?
My honourable friend is absolutely spot on, and I find it hard to believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we're listening to these arguments being made from the other side. I mean, the unintended consequences coming from these choices from the Labour government are not just disappointing, but they are so callous. They are so harsh on some of the most vulnerable communities and vulnerable people in society.
And Lady give way?
I will briefly.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making some excellent points, but does she agree with me that it also shows a deep lack of understanding from the party opposite of the way that our communities are constructed and the organisations that we rely on so much to keep them going?
And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is exactly the point. And what we see instead is the benches opposite just continuing to blame this on their on their economic inheritance, and it's simply not the case. And I just want to quickly quote the chair of the OBR, who said nothing in the OBR's review was a legitimisation of that 22.6 billion. And I actually do wonder at times what the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Ghani, makes of all this. And it was he who, in the run-up to the 2024 general election, of course, came out endorsing Labour. But what so many now see is a government that just doesn't really understand the role that so many charities play in supporting the NHS, communities, older people, young people, families and patients, people who are sick and often terminally ill. For example, why would you protect the public sector and the rest of the NHS from this national insurance tax, but not general practice? And an analysis from the Institute of GP Management estimates that on average, it will cost each practice £20,000 a year. How many staff hours is that equivalent to? How many hours of a GP or a practice nurse's time is that? And on charities, I've spoken to a number of local charities. We've heard from others here today. Every pound that this Labour government squeezes out of them through the jobs tax is an extra pound that can't be spent on frontline services. It's an extra pound that they have to find just to stand still. I just find it so hard to believe that this Labour government is also taxing those who provide vital hospice care. How can they talk of helping palliative care with one hand when clobbering hospices and care providers with extra taxes with their other hand? And then on business. But of course, you know, I can be cynical at times, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I see a complete lack of business expertise, knowledge or experience from the opposite benches. And just visiting businesses is not enough to understand how a business operates. I speak to them in my constituency on a weekly basis. The chair of the CBI has said business has been milked as the cash cow. You simply cannot expect small businesses, or indeed any business, to just be squeezed and squeezed, thinking, well, they'll just increase their costs and pass them on to the end user, because the end user can't afford them, as we've heard this afternoon. Something, ultimately, will have to give. And that's hours, it's training, it's development, and its jobs. And just yesterday, we were in this chamber listening to and debating the government's welfare reform. At its heart, I really believe and want to see people getting back into work. They need support for that, Madam Deputy Speaker, but they also need employers, businesses, to have vacancies to be able to support them back into work too. And what I see with this legislation, like others, is taxing business. You are taxing them out of creating the vital jobs that this country so needs to get the growth which we haven't got at this moment in time. So I think the benches opposite, as I mentioned earlier, are somewhat threadbare, giving the appearance that the government doesn't care. I know, and we've heard people on the other side of this chamber who do care, like we care on this side. I would just start to draw my comments to a conclusion by saying that I would urge members in this chamber on the opposite benches and listening outside to reflect very, very carefully. Tonight, we all have the opportunity to do the right thing, to protect, to help charities, hospices, and by virtue of that, some of the most vulnerable in our country and in our society. We have an opportunity to protect jobs and help businesses create opportunities. By virtue of that, we have the opportunity to help working people, people who aspire and hope for a better life. So I just end quite simply by urging the opposition benches, please think again and do the right thing.
MacCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to express my deep concerns about the government's national insurance changes and the devastating impact they are having on essential services in my constituency of Lewes. The amendments put forward by the Liberal Democrats are crucial to preventing this policy from inflicting serious harm on GP practices, care providers and the wider health system. Take our GP surgeries, vital to healthcare in Lewes and beyond. I've been speaking to local healthcare providers in my community just in the last week. Unlike private businesses, GP surgeries cannot pass their costs on to their patients. Every extra pound spent on national insurance is a pound less spent on patient care, staffing and appointments. The government's failure to exempt them means fewer face-to-face consultations and longer waiting times, in directly contrary to what the government claims are its objectives. Lib Dem Amendments 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13 would protect GP surgeries, NHS-commissioned dentists and pharmacists by keeping their national insurance costs at a sustainable level. Social care providers are in the same predicament. A domiciliary care provider in my constituency is already struggling to recruit and retain staff due to rising costs.
On this point, will the honourable member give way?
Certainly.
I have a similar situation in my constituency with Strada Care, who are under immense strain. They've already closed 4 care homes over the past 7 years due to chronic underfunding. Thousands of care providers are on the brink of collapse, and many more may follow if these amendments are simply not overturned. With social care services already struggling, more vulnerable individuals will be forced into hospitals and bed blocking. Does my honourable friend agree with me that increasing costs for social care providers will have a devastating knock-on effect for the NHS?
Thank you for the intervention, and yes, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. Now, referring to the social care provider in my constituency, they now face a 9.4% increase in employers' costs, which they simply cannot absorb. These are the very people keeping elderly and disabled residents safe in their homes, preventing hospital admissions and easing NHS pressures. Yet the government has chosen to burden them rather than support them. The aforementioned amendments would ensure care providers can continue delivering essential services without being driven into financial crisis.
Honourable friend, accept the intervention.
Certainly.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. The £615 per person cost reported to me by care providers in my constituency will mean that another constituency who's paying £1,500 a week for care of a 94-year-old mother will no longer have the money, after the fees go up as a result of this jobs tax, will no longer have the money to pay for the care of her disabled brother as well. Does my honourable friend agree with me that that is a shockingly unacceptable result of these changes, and the Lord's Amendment put through by the Liberal Democrats should be accepted?
Thank my honourable friend, and I thank him for bringing such a concrete example of the real suffering that these changes will cause. This isn't an abstract thing. This is real people's lives, and there are people who are going to suffer as a result, such as the example given by my honourable friend. I'll move on to nurseries and early years providers, which is an issue very close to my heart. In my constituency, they're facing the same impossible squeeze. The rise in national insurance contributions combined with the increased statutory wage costs is pushing many to the very brink. The National Day Nurseries Association has warned that the average nursery will see an additional £47,000 in costs. Yet the government's funding increase does not come even close to covering this. If nurseries are forced to close, it will leave working parents who are already struggling with the cost of living without the childcare they need. If schools are exempt from this tax hike, which they should be, then nurseries, which provide the very foundation of a child's education, should be too. And what makes this even worse is that the government is not just undermining essential services, but forcing more people towards them by stripping away other forms of support. At the same time as these tax hikes, ministers are cutting vital benefits such as personal independence payment, leaving thousands of vulnerable people struggling to afford the basics. This means more people will have to have no choice but to turn to the very care providers and community health services that are now being financially hit by these national insurance changes. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government cannot claim to support essential services while actively driving them towards collapse. They are giving with one hand while taking much more with the other. Madam Deputy Speaker, I often find it's a gauge of the level of enthusiasm and pride that a government or a party has in a policy it's putting forward by the number of its representatives that turn up to support it and be associated with it. And notwithstanding the heroic contribution of the Honourable Member for Loughborough, the emptiness of the government benches, I think, speaks volumes. The Liberal Democrat amendments before us today would help prevent irreparable damage to GP practices, care providers and the wider healthcare system. I urge the Minister to back these amendments because failing to do so will not just cost money, but it will cost lives.
For Brandreth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to draw attention to my register of interests. This bill is yet another example of legislation from this government that breaks its manifesto promises, harms local business, negatively impacts constituents and limits the growth prospects in our local economy of Chester South and Eddisbury, and indeed the country. Fundamentally, these changes will hit working people hardest. It is the very people that the Chancellor said would be shielded from the impacts of this bill who are the ones who are most affected, meaning lower wages, higher unemployment and increased costs for businesses, resulting in higher prices in the shops. And don't just take my word for it. The Office for Budget Responsibility has itself stated that additional payroll costs for employers are passed through into lower wages. And when I visit and speak with business owners in my constituency, they say they feel like they're swimming against the tide, from the NIC increases to reducing business rates relief. And the reoccurring message from every company I speak to is that confidence in the economy is down. So I ask the Minister, how is this conducive to growth? Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to speak to two of the amendments. Exempting hospices from this damaging increase in employers' national insurance contributions is the right thing to do. I've had the pleasure of visiting both the Hospice of the Good Shepherd in Backford and St Luke's Hospice in Winsford. They provide a vital service to the most vulnerable of my constituents at the most difficult time in their lives. The care and support that they provide is the very best, and I would encourage the Minister to visit and see for himself the warm, compassionate and welcoming environment that they offer. It is a reflection of the attitude of the doctors, nurses, indeed all of the staff who go above and beyond in their work. However, the financial implications of an increase in national insurance contributions and the resulting consequences for services and staff will be hugely damaging. They've shared with me their challenges with recruitment and their deep concern that these tax rises will make the hospice's ability to pay its staff in line with what their colleagues will be receiving in the NHS roles even harder than it already is.
The Honourable Member give way.
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she talks passionately about hospices. Does she agree with me that by taxing hospices but providing tax relief to hospitals through the relief to the NHS actually disincentivises moving people out of hospitals, which the Secretary of State for Health says is his intention?
It's an excellent intervention, and I completely agree. And the frustration that hospices have is that in order to recruit staff, they need to pay comparable wages to what those staff are receiving in the NHS, and this is making it virtually impossible to do so. Hospice care requires a highly specialised workforce in order to provide the levels of care and dignity that they offer to patients. Without the exemptions this amendment proposes, I'm unsure as to their sustainability for the hospices that serve my constituents. The second issue that I'd like to mention briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the impact on transport for children with special educational needs. As we know, the complex needs and challenges for SEN children varies from case to case. Some will need specialist transport to and from school, for appointments, or just for everyday tasks. Many of these young people are vulnerable children. Process and routine matters to them. They might have a driver that they have built a bond with, one who understands their needs. They might be a highly anxious child, or perhaps a non-verbal child who has a driver who can use British Sign Language. For my constituents in Chester South and Eddisbury, specialist transport is of the utmost importance. We have isolated rural communities, and so this is a vital service on which parents and children rely. There are in many areas no transport alternatives. They cannot get a bus, albeit without a specialist driver, for instance, with many of my villages cut off with no public transport options at all.
On that point,
absolutely.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. I live in, as a Member of Parliament for St Albans. It is not a particularly rural area, but many of our children with special educational needs have to travel a great distance because we do not have enough special school places. Would you agree with me that this is an issue that affects children right up and down the land?
Yeah. Absolutely. The Honourable Member makes an important point that whether you are in a rural or an urban community, often these young people are having to travel large distances, and we really need to think about the welfare of those children. You know, they literally, in my constituency, have no other option. And if we make this service effectively unaffordable, we are just taking that option away from SEN children. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will simply say to the Minister and to the benches opposite to consider the real people behind these decisions, to consider the support that will be taken away from vulnerable people and the vital services that will no longer be affordable because of this inexcusable tax increase.
Three final speakers. If anyone intervenes, I will not be able to get all the three final speakers in. Caroline Borden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I would like to rise to speak on Lord's Amendments 1, 2, 3 and 4. The Liberal Democrats are extremely concerned that this tax rise risks having dire consequences for social care, primary care, the NHS, hospices and charities, many of whom are delivering vital healthcare in the community. Thousands of care providers already on the brink of bankruptcy, and this national insurance increase risks tipping them over the edge. The OBR estimates that this hike will bring in £10 billion a year, rather than the £25 billion estimated by the government, once employers change their behaviour in response to the tax, and once public sector employers are compensated. Yes, we know finances are stretched, and the government inherited an incredibly difficult situation, but we do believe the government could have raised that amount of money through much fairer tax changes, and we have come up with many suggestions on these benches. For example, they could have reversed Conservative cuts handed to the big banks, increased the digital services tax, doubled the rate of remote gaming duty, introduced a fair reform of capital gains tax so that the 0.1% of ultra-wealthy individuals pay their fair share. And it may be something particular to Totnes, but I have many wealthy constituents who have told me that they wish they were being asked to pay more tax. Liberal Democrats have called on the government to exempt social care providers and GPs from the employer's national insurance tax rise. On average, the tax rise is going to cost each GP practice an estimated £20,000 a year. The government have announced an additional £889 million into the 25-26 GP contract, but they have failed to spell out how much of that they believe practices will need to use to pay the additional tax burden and how much will be left to meet unmet patient needs. What is clear is that the NI rise will mean that the uplift to the GP contract is in fact far smaller than it appears, because a proportion will need to be returned directly to the Treasury, as many members have said, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So what assessment has the government made of how much of the recent uplift in the GP contract will practices need to use to offset the recent rise in national insurance? Rowcroft Hospice, in my next door to my constituency, but which serves us, says the NIC rise is expected to add £225,000 to annual costs. One of my GP surgeries says their costs will go up by £187,000, and the Devon Mental Health Alliance estimates the cost increase at £375,000, which potentially results in a loss of 25,167 staffing hours. One GP said to us, "I have been a GP for 10 years and a doctor for 15. It's exhausting and I feel like just giving up, frankly. This is not an attractive or stable job for training doctors." And the Devon Mental Health Alliance, which is a strategic partnership uniting 5 leading charitable organisations in Devon, they said, "As a sector, we play a critical role in easing the burden on the NHS by preventing thousands of people from needing GP appointments, hospital care or sitting on waiting lists for treatment. By addressing health issues at their root and offering early intervention and prevention, this sector acts as a frontline defence, reducing demand on overstretched NHS services. They cannot fill the black hole by increasing revenue efficiencies or risk management." They estimate their costs at £375,000 next year, and as I've said, it could mean 25,000 staffing hours lost. That would mean that more people in Devon with complex needs will not be able to access their services. Minister, at a time when we have a mental health crisis across all ages and communities, this extra financial impact on voluntary sector services is short-sighted and will only heap more pressure on the NHS. If we don't value the work done in primary care, particularly by GPs, we are putting the health of our constituents across the country at risk, putting more pressure on GPs who are already working at full capacity, and threatening reforms to the NHS, which has already been brought to its knees by chronic underfunding over the last decade. I strongly urge the Government to reconsider the NIC rise for GPs, social care providers, and all of those working to support health and well-being in the communities we represent. And just to finish, I would like to echo what others have said about the total absence of backbenchers from the government benches who felt able to come in and speak in support of their hospices and their social care providers and their voluntary sector organisations, because they cannot come in here and defend a government policy which they know is indefensible.
I rise in support of these amendments, and I will speak today on the amendments to protect small businesses with up to 25 employees. In Wales, over 99% of all businesses are small or medium enterprises. Of these, nearly 95% are micro-sized, meaning they employ between 1 and 9 people. For all the protections the Government says it has put in place for small businesses, the increase to employers' national insurance contribution will still hit these enterprises hard. There is a lack of homegrown Welsh businesses developing beyond micro-enterprise level and become larger businesses themselves. We need a government that will step up and support local businesses to grow. Unfortunately, this government is doing the exact opposite, as it is estimated that an employer of 40 people, and on average salary, it's about £29,000 worse off a year under the changes to national insurance. Why would Welsh businesses now be incentivised to grow and take on more staff, giving this extra cost? It's worth noting too that the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast that 76% of the cost of the national insurance contributions increase will be passed on to the workers through higher prices and lower pay rises.
Exactly.
The Government has said that small businesses will be shielded from national insurance increases through the changes to employment allowances. However, when asked specifically how many businesses in Wales will benefit, the Government responded by saying it does not know. This Government likes to talk about growth and its essential mission. Can it explain how this policy is good for growth for our small businesses in Wales?
No.
All I can see is that it is bad for Welsh businesses, bad for Welsh workers and bad for the Welsh economy.
Hear, hear.
I urge the Government to support these amendments to at least protect more businesses from the damage that the national insurance hike will cause. I have raised concerns previously in this chamber that this Labour Government is not considering the needs of small and local businesses in its decisions, and these damaging national insurance hikes are only further proof that this is the case.
Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on Lord's Amendments 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13. These amendments, tabled by the Liberal Democrats in the other place, would ensure that care providers, NHS GP practices, NHS commissioned dentists, NHS commissioned pharmacies, charitable providers of health and social care and hospice care continue to pay secondary Class 1 contributions at the rate of 13.8%. With healthcare in such a dire state in Glastonbury and Somerton, it's essential providers are not put into further financial difficulties due to the increase of employer national insurance contributions. Like so many members, my inbox has been brimming with correspondence on this from organisations across my constituency. And I believe that disproportionately this will impact businesses run by women. For example, I've heard from early years provider Acorn Day Nursery in Somerton, who have told me that they believe the employer national insurance contribution increases, in combination with other recent funding announcements, could be the final nail in the coffin for their business, leaving families without crucial early years care provision. In addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've heard from hospice care providers like Dorothy House, who provide crucial end-of-life care for constituents in Glastonbury and Somerton. They will be hard hit by the rises in employer national insurance contribution, which will impact care provision in the constituency for people who live in rural areas. In addition, a GP at Vine Surgery in Street shared their concerns with me about the impact of employer national insurance contributions that will have on them, stating that it will undermine access to patient care following years of neglect from the previous Conservative government. Now, a constituent from Langport recently wrote to me to raise their concerns about the negative impact the rise will have, the national insurance rise will have on care homes. Already stretched care homes could see increases of around £650 per employee for anyone working more than 8 hours per week. This will have a knock-on impact on the cost of care provision. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, coming on to community pharmacies, they play an essential role in providing care in the community, a function that is in line with the government's strategic agenda. However, if the rise of national insurance contributions goes ahead, pharmacies like Bruton, Castlecary, Stoke, Subhampton and Martock could all be put at risk. If they go, vital frontline services for rural communities will be lost. The National Pharmacy Association have predicted that around 1,000 will close by 2027. The combined effect of the national insurance contribution and the national living wage could increase and add an extra £25,000 per pharmacy in rural Somerset, affecting their viability. Now, given the rate of pharmacy closures in Glastonbury and Somerton is nearly double the national average, my constituents will be hard hit by a result of this tax hike. We simply cannot afford in rural areas to lose any more pharmacies or any of our critical frontline services. And I fear these measures will only increase the pressure on GPs and other services who will also be badly impacted by this decision. So I urge colleagues in the House to back the Liberal Democrats' amendments so that we can protect frontline health providers who are shockingly not included in the government's exemption. Without this, we will see health provision and early years provision across the country drastically reduced. Thank you.
I come to the Minister wind-up, Minister James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will respond briefly to some of the points raised in the debate today. And I thank all honourable members for their contributions today as part of consideration of these Lords' amendments. Madam Deputy Speaker, the points raised by the Shadow Minister, I think, repeated many of the points which I addressed in my opening remarks, but he asked a fundamental question, which was, why must this bill be implemented? And I respond to him on that question by saying because of the mess that his party left when we won the election last July. I noted that in his remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker, he refused to say whether he would reverse the changes we're making to national insurance, despite being asked by members on this side of the House. He refused to make clear what his party's position is, that, as the leader of his party did earlier today. Madam Deputy Speaker, we also heard from the Honourable Member for Gosport earlier. She spoke of choices in politics, and she's absolutely right. The politics is about choices, but she was also incapable of explaining what different choices she and her colleagues would make. If they are opposing the changes we're making to national insurance contributions, would they go for higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises? Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friends from Poole and the Honourable Member for Chester South and Edinburgh spoke about special educational needs transport facilities. I mentioned in my earlier remarks during this debate that the budget and the provisional local government finance settlement set out how the government has announced £2 billion of new grant funding for local government in 25-26. Now, this includes £515 million to support councils with employer national insurance contributions. However, it's not ring-fenced, which means that it's for local authorities to determine how to use this funding across relevant services and responsibilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, there was also a comment, although I see he's not here, from the Honourable Member for Stone, Great Ryley and Penkridge. Maybe he is off feeding his spider at the moment. I don't know where he's gotten to, Madam Deputy Speaker, but he made a rather colourful comparison between some of the points I was making and those points made by a former colleague of his. But I don't know if he realised that in doing so, he implied that the positions the former Secretary of State for Health was defending were indefensible. And I would be interested to see what policies he thought of the previous government were in fact indefensible. And next time he returns from his spider care duties, I would like to ask him what he considers was indefensible. But in his absence, I will tell him what is indefensible, Madam Deputy Speaker. What is indefensible is for members opposite to have voted to support the Liz Truss mini-budget. What is indefensible is what they did to public services over 14 years. And what would have been indefensible, Madam Deputy Speaker, is for us to let the situation carry on as it was when we won the general election. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill makes some of the difficult but necessary decisions that we, as a government, have had to take to fix the public finances and to get public services back on their feet. The amendments from the other place require information that has already been provided. They do not recognise other policies the government has in place, or most seriously, they seek to undermine the funding that this bill will secure. I therefore respectfully propose that this House disagrees to these amendments today.
Right. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1. As many of their opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Kate Dearden and Keir Mather, and the tellers for the noes are Nick Timothy and James Weald.
order.
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 182.
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 182. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to Lord's Amendment 2. Minister move motion to disagree formally. Minister to move to disagree formally. Marvellous. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 2. As many of their opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Need to be seated if they are close to me on the benches. Need to be. There's no point running. I'll still see you. No point running. Oh, seated, please. Seated. The question is, as on the order paper, as many that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes are Kate Dearden and Keir Mather, and the tellers for the noes are Nick Timothy and James Weald. Order.
The ayes to the right, 310. The noes to the left, 183.
The ayes to the right, 310. The noes to the left, 183. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to Lord's Amendment 3. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
Formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3. As many as are opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. No. Submission. Clear the lobby. John. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Kate Dearden and Claire Mather, and the tellers for the noes are Nick Timothy and James Weald.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 314. The noes to the left, 187.
The ayes to the right, 314. The noes to the left, 187. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to Lord's Amendment 4. Minister to move motion to disagree formally. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 4. As many that are opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. No. Commissioner, clear the lobby. To be on the benches or out of the chamber. On the benches or out of the chamber. On the benches will be better than trying to do that. The question is, as on the order paper, as many that opinion say aye. On the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Kate Dearden and Keir Mather, and the tellers for the noes are Nick Timothy and James Weald.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 313. The noes to the left, 190.
The ayes were 313, the noes were 190, so the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to Lord's Amendment 5. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
To move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 5. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 6. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
To move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 6. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 7. Minister to move motion to disagree formally. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 7. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 8. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 8. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Kate Dearden, Kay Mather. Tellers for the noes, David Simmons, Paul Holmes. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 316. The noes to the left, 189.
The ayes were 316, the noes were 189. So the ayes have it, unlocked. We now come to Lord's Amendment 9. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 9. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 10. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 10. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 11. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 11. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 12. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 12. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 13. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 13. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is that this House disagrees. We now come to Lord's Amendment 14. Minister to move motion to disagree formally. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 14. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 15. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 15. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 16. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 16. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 17. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 17. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 18. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 18. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 19. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 19. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Lord's Amendment 20. As this House was informed earlier, Mr Speaker is satisfied that the Lord's Amendment 20 would impose a charge on the public revenue which is not authorised by the money resolution passed by this House on the 3rd of December 2024. In accordance with paragraph 3 of Standing Order number 78, Lord's Amendment 20 is therefore deemed to be disagreed to. We now come to Lord's Amendment 21. Minister to move motion to disagree formally.
I move formally.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 21. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Kate Dearden, Kay Mather. Tellers for the noes, David Simmons, Paul Holmes. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 316. The noes to the left, 187.
The ayes were 316, the noes were 187, so the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock. Minister to move that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons.
I move formally.
I beg to move that a committee be appointed to draw up the reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments. That James Murray, Christian Wakeford, Imogen Walker, Dan Tomlinson, Chris Vince, Gareth Davies and Daisy Cooper be members of the committee. That James Murray be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee and that the committee to withdraw immediately.
The question is that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments 1 to 21, that James Murray, Christian Wakeford, Imogen Walker, Dan Tomlinson, Chris Vince, Gareth Davies and Daisy Cooper be members of the committee, that James Murray be chair of the committee, that 3 be the quorum of the committee, that the committee do withdraw immediately. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. That concludes consideration of Lord's amendments to the National Insurance Contributions Secondary Class 1 Contributions Bill. I'll now give a few moments for the benches to settle.